Hi everyone, today's comparison is between the Vivo V50 and the Vivo X200. I know there's a price difference between these two, but that's even a better reason to compare these two. Because simply put, you can save about 200 euros and get something like this over the Vivo X200. So, let's showcase the difference between these two when it comes to the camera performance. But before we start, of course, let's look at the specifications. So let's quickly look at specifications for both. When it comes to the Vivo V50, we get a 6.77 inch AMOLED display with a refresh rate of 120Hz and a peak brightness of 4500 nits. We get the Snapdragon 7 Gen 3, and in terms of memory it goes from 128GB up to 512GB, and it is UFS 2.2. And next to it is 6000 mAh battery, and of course supports 90W wired charging. When it comes to the Vivo X200, we get a 6.67 inch AMOLED display with 120Hz refresh rate and also 4500 nits of peak brightness. It has a higher resolution though, and therefore a higher PPI of 460 versus 388. In terms of CPU, it has the MediaTek Dimensity 9400. When it comes to memory configurations, you go from 256GB all the way up to 1TB, and it is UFS 4.0. When it comes to the battery, it's a 5800 mAh battery globally and a 5220 for Austria. And now for the part that we are going to compare. We get a 50 megapixel main sensor on the Vivo V50 with an f-stop of 1.9, 23mm equivalent and a 1/1.55 inch sensor size. For the Vivo X200, we get a 50 megapixel sensor as well, however an f-stop of 1.6, 23mm equivalent and a slightly smaller 1/1.56 inch sensor size. For the ultra-wide, we get a 50 megapixel sensor with an f-stop of 2.0, 15mm equivalent and a 1/2.76 inch sensor size for the Vivo V50. And it's the same for the X200. We get a 50 megapixel sensor with an f-stop of 2.0, 15mm equivalent and again a 1/2.76 inch sensor size. However, the Vivo X200 does support an extra lens. It's the periscope. It's a 50 megapixel sensor with an f-stop of 2.6, 70mm equivalent and a 1/1.95 inch sensor size. It's also worth noting that you can record up to 4K in 60 frames per second on the X200 with the front and rear facing cameras, where the Vivo V50 is limited to 4K and 30 frames per second for the front and the rear cameras as well. Now both of these are taken on size natural, but as you can see there's a pretty big difference in terms of color between the two, with the Vivo V50 being a lot warmer. But at the same time we also see way more artificial sharpening on the Vivo X200 as well on the bricks itself. And that is including with me having sharpening about -20 in this case on the X200. Now with this windmill shot there's a lot going on in this one, but I wanted to see a clear difference here. Again, colors are pretty different between the two. The Vivo V50 is quite a bit brighter at the windmill part itself, but also a lot warmer in terms of the shot overall. Zooming in reveals that the X200 however has a lot more detail, and not artificially so. Of course it also has a bit more smoothing going on. Getting a bit closer to it again and you can see a big difference between the two in terms of color. I would say in terms of color the shot should look somewhat in between the two itself to get really what I was seeing. But the Vivo V50 is a lot warmer than it should be honestly. Again, zooming in though also reveals a lot more detail retained on the Vivo X200 over the Vivo V50. Now in this shot however, that way too much warming of the shot is gone. We get more of a balanced shot on the Vivo V50, and the X200 funny enough is a bit warmer overall in this case. And the whites are a lot brighter on the V50, but also comes at a loss of detail in comparison. Now I love shooting this car. The Vivo V50 is the much sharper shot in this case however. You can see a pretty big difference in terms of color of the car as well, with it being closer to reality on the Vivo V50, though a bit too saturated compared to what it actually was. It also makes that car stand out more because of the approach of the shot itself, where on the Vivo X200, because of that warmer hue over the entire shot, it feels a little bit more blended in. Now here they're getting close in terms of colors. Again, the Vivo V50 has a bit more saturation to the shot itself, but that's also because the Vivo X200 allows me to control that and I have it set up to -10 on it. But if you ignore that, the shot apart from the contrast in terms of difference looks quite similar. It seems like it's from the same brand in this case. There's more softening going on the X200 though, and it has a tad more detail as well. At 160% zoom, parts of the V50 looks a tad more pixelated, but of course that is zooming a lot on the shot itself. It is even more noticeable though if you start zooming in a lot more. The difference of saturation is very noticeable here as well. The sky looks a lot more blue, and again the Vivo X200 is a tad warmer, but closer to reality in this case. And shortly a different composition of the same position itself. You can see the same reaction in this shot again. I do like the contrast though that I'm getting on the Vivo V50. It adds a bit more depth to the shot for me. With the X200 though, of course we are retaining more details, like some other shots that I've shown so far. Now this is a pretty chilly day and you can see that with the water being a bit frozen, but in terms of the shot we again see a very similar result. But the Vivo V50 has a bit more contrast to the shot, and because of that it adds a little bit of depth to the shot itself and really make that windmill stand out, having a focus point that really stands out in this case in comparison to the X200 that blends a little bit more together. Now with this shot that saturation difference is pretty clear, but also the color difference here. The X200 has more of that orange hue where the Vivo V50 is far more red. It is also noticeable that the shot on the X200 has a much nicer contrast on the shot as well, and it retains a lot more detail on the ceiling itself right above the train, where the Vivo V50 looks a lot more noisy. In general, with the main sensor, the Vivo X200 will win in terms of details and general performance, which isn't a shocker. The possible price difference should make this clear from the beginning. They both, however, can have a very similar approach in some shots where you can easily tell they are related to each other.
4K 30 frames per second on both. Of course, that's the max on the Vivo V50, where you can record 4K 60 frames for instance on the Vivo X200. Again, X200 can switch during video recording between different focal lengths, where the Vivo V50 cannot do any of that. Of course, it only has an ultra wide, but you cannot switch. So I manually need to stop now and showcase the ultra wide, where I don't need to do that with the Vivo with the Vivo X200. And now ultra wide for both. Again, I needed to stop on, of course, the V50 where the X200 didn't need to. X200 is a little bit too cool with the Vivo V50. Now with the ultra wide, it's a little bit too warm. Color wise, it's like in between both of them basically. Kind of see, okay, sure. Nicer contrast though on the V50 if you ask me. Like it feels like it has a little bit more depth to it because it allows some shadows to be there. Although the saturation of the greens is a bit much. 4K 30 frames per second on both the Vivo X200 and the V50. Quite a bit of color difference, and of course the V50 is quite a bit wider. So right now I have it at a crop of 1, but this is the max, like the width of it itself. Color wise, I'd say the jacket is better on the V50. There's a bit more saturation, like for instance the shirt that I'm wearing, quite a bit more saturated on the V50 over reality. But I do like the contrast better on the V50 over the X200. Time to move to the ultra wide, and it seems that both of them are using the same sensor. However, there will be a difference in terms of processing. Starting with this windmill, and here you can see a big difference in the processing. Again, both are on texture mode and both lose a decent amount of detail when zooming in. In terms of color accuracy, the X200 is closer to reality out of the two. Now with this shot it was hard to get the shot perfectly the same, but you can see the contrast we spoke about before being better on the Vivo V50. It just adds a bit more depth to the shot with those shadows in the shot as well, being a bit darker. It just feels a bit nicer to me. That being said, the building does blend in a lot more on the Vivo V50 over the X200, and preference is really going to matter in shots like this. With this shot you can see somewhat of a similar approach, but there are some differences. The Vivo V50 is the warmer out of the two and the white is more white on the X200. Also the X200 has a bit more of that
blue in the sky over the V50, which is actually something that will turn around later on. And now we're back to that same old car. Again, saturation is a bit more on the Vivo V50. It's also a bit more in focus of the car because of the approach of the shot itself. Be it more of that contrast in the shot or the tad darker shadows, it just feels like it's highlighting the car better, just like it did with the main sensor. Now with this windmill, the same counts again. The Vivo V50 has more saturation, but also more contrast to the shot. I feel like I like it a tad better because of it. That includes the bit brighter effect in the sky itself. If you zoom into the shot itself, both are pretty similar, but the X200 has a bit better control over the noise itself over the Vivo V50. This shot really shows the more saturation off, not to mention the bit cooler style that it has. But the sky is a good amount more blue compared to the X200 that does reflect reality a bit better. And of course the green grass difference is quite obvious as well. That being said, the Vivo 50 again has a tad more contrast to it. It just pulls my eyes a bit more towards that center of the shot because of it compared to the X200. Details again are comparable. At some parts the Vivo V50 handles it better, but at some parts the X200 handles it better. But the X200 does have better smoothing going on and better control over the noise itself. In general, with the ultra-wide we get a close to same effect on what we saw with the main sensor. The Vivo V50 will have a bit more contrast and more depth because of it, where the X200 will be a bit more natural and closer to reality in terms of colors most of the time. It also has a bit better control over the noise on the Vivo X200. That being said, if you like that bit more saturation, you can easily adjust that when it comes to the Vivo X200, but you cannot with of course the Vivo V50. You don't have those quick toggles in auto shoot. Now it's time for some low light, and I chose a cold rainy day because it really can add to the ambience of the scene. And in this first shot, the X200 struggles more with the lens flare compared to the V50, though the X200 has better balanced light sources. Look at the board at the bus station and also the building at the back. For this shot, both have a bit of a lens flare, but it's more pronounced on the V50. In terms of colors, the X200 is closer to what you are getting in reality, with the darker skies and a bit of grey inside of it. The V50 is a bit off in that yellow hue that we're getting, but also a bit too bright in the sky itself. Next to it, I also like the bit more contrasty look on the X200, and if you look at the details itself, more so at the buildings on the side, you will see that the X200 retains a bit more of it. In this shot, the colors between the two is pretty different, and the image quality and the details are better on the X200 over the V50, which also because of the contrast has a better separation of the parts. Now in this shot the color difference is pretty obvious, but also how much better the X200 handles light sources. It also manages to capture some of those raindrops falling where the V50 wasn't able to do so because of the shutter speed difference. Now this is one of my favorite buildings to shoot when it comes to low light, and again here are some pretty obvious differences, with the main one being of course the contrast. The X200 retains that low light feel better because of it. Shadows are a bit darker and the sky reflects reality better on what you get on the V50, which is quite a bit brighter. It's a trend you will see every single time when you compare the Vivo V50 and of course the X200. In low light I will simply say that the X200 is definitely better than the Vivo V50. The Vivo V50 of course naturally will be lower in price, and therefore I would say it really depends on the kind of money you want to pay, but when it comes to low light and the main sensor so far, the Vivo X200 is the clear winner here. Time for the ultra wide. In this first shot the X200 is a lot warmer than the V50. Also it has a bit of a rain bubble on the left side because of course that's the reality of the rain. Both have a similar amount of dynamic range control in this shot, with the main difference being the warmth and the contrast. Now with this shot the contrast is a decent amount more on the V50 with a much darker ground. For the rest though both look really similar apart from the slight dynamic range difference. But also on the X200 it has better noise control and it retains more detail on the X200, even though parts of it look a little bit artificial. Here the X200 easily wins. This shot is way better in terms of balance, where parts of the V50 look a bit overexposed or something just going on where it looks really bright in the center, and a good amount more of noise in the shot as well. Again though, there are parts that look artificial, like the text on the small flags, like you can see here on the X200, where the V50 has less of it. Now this shot is the other way around. Unsure what happened here with the X200, but the sky wasn't anything like that, and the statue wasn't looking like that. That's way too wide. And the contrast is also a lot nicer on the V50, where it looks more like an actual low light shot. Yes, the X200 has better noise control, but that's about it in this shot, with again some artificial stuff going on to enhance the shot on the X200. This ultra wide shot however is a hard one. I think both have their struggles and the colors look somewhat off for both of them. It's a bit of a difference in the hue of the color itself than what we are seeing here, but both retain that nice dark sky that it should be. Both of them also have a decent noise control and less artificial help on the X200 compared to some other shots that I've shown when it comes to this X200. For the ultra wide on both, they're not going to be mind blowing. While the X200 will do better in noise control and most of the time has a bit more potential, it does have some artificial effects and I'm not a fan of that myself. Where the V50 will have less of that, but in turn more noise. Though again, the Vivo V50 will cost a decent penny less.
4K 30 frames per second, both the Vivo X200 and the Vivo V50. Now naturally the V50 is a little bit more zoomed out, wider angle. When it comes to the way it looks, on both of them a bit off, of course, naturally. But if you're looking for more information and better visibility, X200 is doing better. But the V40 definitely reflects low light better, because it is really dark here and cold. The Vivo V50 is limited to 4K 30 frames per second. I cannot switch between different focal lengths, or I can with the X200. Mispress. So now I'm on the circle effect. There you go, it's fixed. So you can see, you can switch between different focal lengths. I cannot with the V50. You can zoom in manually, but of course we don't actually have a zoom lens. It's an ultra wide and a main sensor on the Vivo V50. Now this is where I compare the Worrell light versus the LED on the Vivo X200. So we're going to see the difference clearly between both of them. Again, that Worrell light is a bit more balanced because of the larger scale itself. It is quite bright, but it is decently easy to look straight into it. Anyway, let's now go to the Vivo X200 and showcase the difference of a more harsher light, a LED. Now to make it fair for both, I'm using 4K and 30 frames per second because of course the Vivo V50 is limited to 4K 30 frames per second. The light definitely is brighter in my face because it is more condensed, but I'm unsure of course right now what the difference is in terms of lighting and balance itself. Again, it is a little bit more easy to look into the light when it comes to the Vivo V50 compared to this X200, and also it creates like a really weird effect in my eyes. But either way, this is the difference when it comes to that. And of course I recorded them separately because else the Vivo X200 will get the benefit of that Worrell light.
So at the end, when it comes to the comparison between the Vivo V50 and the X200, you have to take into account the price difference between both of these. For the Vivo V50, you're paying €200 less. You have to take that in account. And the question then becomes for you, whether you feel like there's a €200 difference between these two devices when it comes to the two supporting sensors that I can utilize here. Because of course, when it comes to the X200, you do get that periscope, and that periscope allows for nicer macro, even though there is some artificial help with that one. And of course, it does allow for you to have better enhanced zooming compared to what you are getting on the Vivo V50, which is cropping in on the main sensor. Therefore, the result will simply be better on the X200. Either way, let me know what you think about this comparison, how these two stack up for you, and whether you think that €200 difference is there for you when it comes to the X200 versus the V50. Anyway, before we go, of course, I really want to thank my members. Thank you so much for the support that you guys have been giving me. I really appreciate it. And of course, if you want to become a member, you can click join somewhere below. And while you're down there and you aren't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe. We're getting closer and closer to that 20k subscription. I wanted to say 200,000. That's a bit away, isn't it? Either way, if you aren't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe if you want to. And of course, push that bell icon so you can see like when a new video is coming up. I'm trying my best to of course upload a substantial amount of videos and showcase different comparisons as well, but also standalone videos. And I'm working on a video on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, which is taking longer than I wanted to, but it's a different style where I'm trying to tell a story. Either way, hope you enjoyed this video, and of course if you did, don't forget to like and everything like that, and talk to you guys in the next.